Hello, my name is Phyllis. I am 65 years old, and I want to tell you a story that changed my life forever. My son had just gotten married and brought his new wife to live with us. From the very first day, she sneered at everything around me. Who even lives like this? Ugh, it reeks of dog, she said, rolling her eyes at the furniture I had chosen over the years. She replaced everything, acting as if my home and my life didn't matter at all. I tried to be patient, tried to see the good in her, but her cruelty didn't stop there. Weeks later, unaware of the secret I had just discovered, that I had inherited a billion-dollar empire, she coldly threw me and my loyal old dog out like trash. That moment could have broken me, but it didn't. Standing on the porch in the cold, watching my world crumble, I felt a strange spark of determination. Little did she know the tables were about to turn, and what happened next was more dangerous, more thrilling, and more satisfying than I could have ever imagined. What secrets was I about to uncover? How would I confront the betrayal? And what role would my faithful dog play in everything that was about to unfold? But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching from. I love reading the comments and seeing where everyone is from. Now let's find out how this story really began. The day David brought Karen home was supposed to be special, wasn't it? You don't expect to be blindsided by betrayal on a day you're supposed to celebrate the future. But then again, I never really understood how people like Karen operated. At first, she smiled that tight smile of hers, the one that barely stretched her lips but never quite reached her eyes. You know the kind, the one you give when you're pretending to be polite, but it's clear you're already sizing someone up. I had hoped things would go smoothly as much as I could with my arthritis playing up. I tried to be the mother-in-law I thought I should be, the kind that welcomes the new spouse with open arms. I cooked their favorite meals, even though my joints ached from standing too long. I wanted David to smile, wanted to see him happy, even if that meant biting my tongue, while Karen made snide remarks under her breath. Who even lives like this? She had sneered the first time she stepped into the house. It reeks of dog in here. I could feel the insult in her words, but I pushed it down, buried it beneath the weight of love I still carried for my son. The house was small, sure. It wasn't the grand home I once dreamed of, but it had character. It had love. But Karen didn't care about that. She went straight to work, replacing the furniture I'd chosen with sleek, expensive things I couldn't afford to touch. The old wooden chairs that had been passed down through generations? Gone. The kitchen table where we had eaten meals together, the one with scratches from years of use? She replaced it too, as though all the memories had no place here. It wasn't even about the furniture. It was about something deeper, something much more painful. She saw me, saw us as obstacles in her life, something to be scrubbed away like dust. But the worst part wasn't even her, it was David. My own son, the man who had once clung to my side, the boy I'd nurtured, who once looked at me with admiration. I had raised him alone, doing my best with what I had. And yet, when the time came to stand by me, he didn't. He stood behind her, his eyes avoiding mine as she made it clear she was the one in charge now. I was prepared for some adjustment, of course. I knew that when your children grow up, they change, but I never imagined they would change so much. David, my David, was becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone who couldn't look his own mother in the eye. I should have known, but I never thought it would come to this. Karen had been plotting for weeks, maybe longer. She had her sights set on my house, the only thing I had left, and, with her, she took my son's heart. She couldn't be bothered to even pretend to be civil anymore. I suppose that's why she kicked Barnaby's water bowl across the kitchen. The little guy had been underfoot, as he always was, his soft brown eyes watching her every move. But he wasn't good enough for her. Filth, she had called him, her nose wrinkling in disgust. And in that moment, I knew. I knew this wasn't just about furniture or even space in the house. This was about her complete disregard for everything I held dear. And that included me. I looked down at Barnaby, my loyal beagle who was always there when I needed him, his ears drooping with the confusion only a dog could feel. "Barnaby," I whispered to him, rubbing his soft ears as I felt the familiar sting of tears well up. "We have to be nice. She's family now, I guess." But I knew even then that family wasn't just about blood, it was about loyalty. And loyalty, at least on her part, was non-existent. It was late one evening when it all came to a head. I had made them their favorite dinner, though my hands trembled as I set the plates down in front of them. I hoped David would look at me and see the effort, the sacrifice, but all he did was stare at his plate. Karen hardly touched her food. The silence between us was suffocating. I cleared the plates in silence, my body aching, trying to ignore the fact that I felt utterly invisible. Then, after dinner, it came. The thing I had feared but never thought would happen. Karen stood up, looking me over with that cold, calculating look. "Phyllis," she said, "it's time you move out. We need the space for the baby." My heart sank, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I thought she was joking. I thought surely this was a bad dream. David didn't speak. He didn't even look at me. I glanced at him, but he avoided my eyes, looking down at his shoes like a child caught in a lie. Karen was still holding that cold, rehearsed smile as she handed me a suitcase, just like she was sending me off on a vacation I had no interest in taking. "It's time for you to go to a home," she said, and I could feel the finality in her words. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. But in that moment, something changed inside me. I couldn't even cry. I was too numb. I grabbed the suitcase, and Barnaby, who had been sitting by my side, looked up at me as if to say, "What now, Mom?" I didn't say anything as I stepped out the door. The autumn wind cut through me like a blade. It felt colder than it ever had before. I stood there, the weight of the world pressing down on me, and then I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. A notification. I pulled it out, and my hands shook as I saw it was from the law firm handling my late brother's estate. I almost didn't want to read it. I was too exhausted, too broken, but something urged me on. I opened the message. The transfer was complete. I wasn't just homeless. I was now the owner of my late brother's construction company, the very one David worked for. I looked down at Barnaby, who was still beside me, his warmth a small comfort in the cold. "Well, Barnaby," I whispered, as the wind howled around us, "I guess it's time for things to get interesting." I didn't tell them. Not yet. Not a word. Even as the realization of my inheritance settled over me like an invisible cloak, I knew I needed time. Time to breathe, to feel, to understand the depth of the betrayal before I acted. So I checked into a modest motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with a faded sign and parking spots that had seen better decades. They allowed dogs, and that was enough. Barnaby curled up on the scratchy bedspread, his little body pressed against mine as if he could absorb some of the grief I carried. He let out a heavy sigh that seemed to echo the hollow ache in my own chest, and I ran my hand over his fur, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. In that moment, I realized that home wasn't a house or a piece of property. It was him. Always him. The first night, I lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, feeling the thrum of the air conditioner as it labored against the warm night. I could hear the faint hum of distant traffic, the muffled arguments and laughter from neighboring rooms. It was a chorus of lives continuing without me. The wind rattled a loose window pane, and I drew Barnaby closer, whispering into his ears, "We'll be okay, boy. Somehow, we'll be okay." My voice cracked, and I realized I had been holding my breath for days, maybe weeks, in an attempt to keep my composure. The motel room, with its peeling wallpaper and faded floral carpet, became our sanctuary, a small island in the storm of everything I had lost. Days passed. I wandered the streets with Barnaby, letting the city's rhythm guide me. I spent mornings at the local park, watching ducks glide over the pond, tossing crumbs into the water, and listening to the soft plop as they caught them mid-swim. People watched me curiously, an older woman with her dog, speaking to the birds as if they were old friends. I talked to strangers, finding a strange solace in the fragments of other lives. They didn't know me, and I didn't know them, and perhaps that was exactly what I needed. One day, as I sat on a worn bench, Barnaby sniffing the grass nearby, a young waitress approached me. She was in her early 20s, her apron stained from a long shift, her hands roughened from endless hours of serving tables. She knelt down and whispered to Barnaby, slipping him an extra piece of bacon. "My grandma was just like you," she said softly, tears welling in her eyes. "She taught me to never let anyone tell me my worth. You remind me of her." I felt a lump rise in my throat. My chest tightened as if someone had placed a heavy hand over it. I dug into my purse, finding a crisp $500 bill, and slipped it into the pocket of her apron without her noticing. She smiled, unaware of the gift, and walked away. Helping her healed something in me, a fragment that Karen had shattered when she kicked us out, when she told me I was disposable, irrelevant. In that simple act, I felt a spark of life return, a reminder that even discarded souls could still wield kindness. But I couldn't stay in that temporary solace forever. I needed answers. I needed to know the depth of the rot that had infiltrated my life, and I wasn't ready to confront them without knowing the full extent. One crisp morning, I drove my old sedan, the one that had been mine for decades, scratched and dented from years of use, to the construction site. I parked a block away, hidden behind a row of shrubs, and watched from a distance. My heart ached as I saw David and Karen laughing together, hands brushing, smiles too perfect for my understanding. They drove a brand new luxury car, one I recognized immediately. It was the one purchased with my retirement savings, the very funds they had drained from our joint account before casting me into the street. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, nails digging into leather worn thin from years of care. I felt a bitter surge of anger mingled with sorrow. The man I had raised, the boy I had nurtured, was smiling while my world was in ruins. I remained there for hours, silent, observing the ease with which they inhabited a life built from my sacrifices. Every laugh, every casual glance, every touch between them was a reminder of how completely they had discarded me, how thoroughly they had erased me from their reality. Barnaby rested his head on my lap, and I stroked his ears, whispering reassurances to both him and myself. We were not defeated, not yet. Later that week, I went to the bank to freeze what remained of my finances. The teller, a young woman with nervous eyes and trembling hands, looked at me with something like pity. "Mrs. Vance," she whispered, her voice almost breaking, "I can't access your account. It's been flagged for fraud. By your son." My chest constricted. The world around me blurred for a second. I gripped the counter until my knuckles went white. I wanted to shout, to cry, to collapse, but instead I held Barnaby close, feeling the steady warmth of his body against mine. He nudged my hand, his eyes wide and understanding. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was calculated, meticulous, a cruel tapestry of deceit woven with careful precision. And yet, despite the fury boiling in my chest, a strange clarity emerged. They had underestimated me. They had assumed that because I was older, because I had been patient and kind, I would be weak. But Barnaby and I together, we were still capable. We had survived hardship before, and we would survive this too. I walked back to the car in the late afternoon, the sun, low and golden on the horizon, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Barnaby trotted beside me, ears perked as if sensing my thoughts. "We have to be smart," I whispered. "We can't act recklessly. We need to see everything, to understand before we strike." I could feel the fire igniting within me, a quiet, controlled determination. My heart ached, yes, but it also pulsed with life, with possibility. The world had tried to discard me, but it hadn't won. Not yet. And as I drove back to the motel, Barnaby's head resting on the seat beside me, I knew that our journey had only just begun. I would be silent for now, an observer hidden in plain sight, but soon the truth would unfold, and they would see just how underestimated I had been. I thought I had seen the worst of their cruelty, but life has a way of showing you depths you never imagined. I had assumed being cast out of my own home, my son's laughter ringing as he drove away with Karen, was the nadir of my suffering, but it wasn't. Not even close. Because I soon discovered that their betrayal was more calculated, more sinister, than I could have fathomed. They weren't content with simply throwing me into the street. They were trying to strip me of everything I had earned, everything I had fought for, everything that made me who I was. One gray morning, the phone call came. I had just settled Barnaby into the passenger seat of my old sedan, his head resting against the leather seat, his eyes soft with trust. I ran my fingers through his fur, trying to draw courage from him, when the words hit me. My own son and his wife were attempting to declare me mentally incompetent, so they could seize not only the house I had lived in all my life, but also my pension, the meager retirement fund I had scraped together over decades of factory work. The room seemed to spin, the weight of the truth pressing down on me like a physical force. I gritted my teeth, trying to steady my trembling hands, but it wasn't fear making them shake. No, it was rage, pure, burning, righteous fury that surged from the depths of my bones. "Barnaby," I said, buckling him into his seatbelt. "They think I'm a confused old lady. They're about to meet the woman who raised 3 ungrateful children on a factory wage, who survived floods, layoffs, and broken hearts without losing herself. They are about to meet the real me." I could feel the muscles in my jaw lock as I stared out at the empty street. The city was waking, oblivious to the storm gathering in my chest, unaware that I had been wronged in ways that demanded justice. I drove to meet Mr. Henderson, my late brother's lawyer, a man whose reputation for sharpness was almost as formidable as his patience for the truth. He looked up as I entered, his eyes taking in my worn coat, my tired face, and the faint shadows under my eyes from sleepless nights. "Phyllis," he said, disbelief lacing his voice, "you own the building we're sitting in. Why are you living in a motel?" His words weren't accusatory. They were genuinely astonished. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, piecing together the gaps in the puzzle he had assumed were trivial. I sat down, trying to appear calm despite the fire that was still smoldering within me. "Because," I said slowly, savoring the rich, hot coffee he had poured for me, "I want to see how far they'll go. Let the trap snap shut only when the cheese is fully eaten. Mr. Henderson raised an eyebrow, unsure if I was speaking metaphorically or literally, but I didn't bother explaining. He knew me well enough to understand that when I said something like that, I meant it with every fiber of my being. Barnaby, sensing the tension, nudged my hand with his nose. He knew something was coming, even if he couldn't understand what it was. His presence was my anchor, the one constant in a life that had become suddenly treacherous. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the coffee against my fingers, and tried to steady my thoughts. I needed information. I needed to see the extent of their deceit, to uncover every hidden move they had made behind my back. As if on cue, Barnaby stiffened, his ears rising, hackles slightly bristling. My attention followed his, and my stomach sank. A man in a dark suit was entering the office, purposeful and confident, holding a file clutched tightly in one hand. Barnaby barked sharply, a sound that seemed almost human in its urgency. I knew that file. I had seen enough of life to recognize the weight a folder like that could carry. And when I saw the name scrawled on the cover, my heart tightened with a mix of anticipation and dread. The man was David's boss, the regional manager, the very person who had been overseeing the division where my son worked, who had smiled politely when I had once asked questions during site visits. Now here he was holding a file that could very well dictate the course of my future, or perhaps the last shreds of control Karen and David believed they had over my life. I felt a wave of anger, but it was tempered by the clarity that only experience can bring. I leaned back in my chair, my hands folded over Barnaby's head as I considered my options. There was fear, yes, but it was controlled. There was anger, yes, but it was calculated. I wasn't powerless, and I refused to act rashly. Every movement, every reaction had to be deliberate. I would watch, I would observe, and then, when the time was right, I would act. I imagined David and Karen sitting somewhere unaware that the mother they thought was weak was quietly plotting, unraveling the web of deceit that they had woven so carefully. I imagined Barnaby and me, partners in our silent war, waiting for the precise moment to strike. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my dignity, my life, and the respect that had been stripped from me. I sipped the coffee again, letting the warmth spread through my chest. I whispered to Barnaby, "We're not angry fools, boy. We're patient hunters, and patience will win us everything." His eyes met mine, dark and intelligent, and I swear I could see him understanding every word. My little companion, my loyal friend, had been through storms before, and together we had weathered this one as well. The regional manager continued into the office, unaware of my presence, unaware that I was watching, waiting, noting every step, every nuance. My pulse quickened, not with panic, but with the thrill of possibility. They had underestimated me, as they always did. They had assumed that my age, my quiet demeanor, and my past sacrifices made me weak. But Barnaby and I knew the truth. We were not weak. We were just getting started. As I left the office, Barnaby safely buckled in the back seat. I felt a strange combination of exhaustion and exhilaration. The game had changed. The stakes were higher, yes, but so was my resolve. I had been betrayed, deceived, and discarded, but I was not defeated. I was a silent observer now, watching the pieces move, preparing to strike with precision, patience, and unshakable determination. And I knew, deep in my bones, that when the time came, justice sweet, inevitable justice would be ours. I had learned something crucial in the last few days. The regional manager wasn't just an innocent bystander in the chaos of my life. No, he was an accomplice, a piece of the machinery that had tried to grind me down, to steal everything I had built. The realization hit me like a cold slap to the face one evening as I sat in the dim light of my motel room, Barnaby curled up at my feet. He looked up at me with his knowing eyes, sensing the intensity of my thoughts, the brewing determination. "We need to see everything," I whispered to him, my voice firm yet tender, every detail, every plan. If they think I'm foolish, they're about to learn otherwise. By the next day, I had formulated a plan. It was risky, yes, but I had little to lose and everything to gain. I used my legal authority as the new owner of the company to request employment, carefully choosing the role that would make me invisible, night janitor. Nobody notices the cleaning lady. Nobody sees her, and that invisibility would be my greatest advantage. I walked into the HR office with my head held high, despite the aches in my knees and the stiffness in my back, and explained my situation. The paperwork was processed quickly. By that evening I had the uniform, the mop, the bucket, and the freedom to move through the building without suspicion. Barnaby, of course, came along. He was my support animal, and the ADA regulations meant he had every right to be there. I smiled down at him as he wagged his tail, a silent partner in what was about to become our mission. Mopping floors at 65 is no easy task. Every muscle ached, every joint reminded me of my age. Yet There was a strange satisfaction in the rhythm, the push and pull of the mop, the gentle squeak of the bucket rolling across the polished floors. And while I cleaned, I listened. Every voicemail left on unattended desks, every note scribbled and forgotten, became a piece of the puzzle. Barnaby padded beside me, his nose twitching, his ears alert. He seemed to understand that each step we took brought us closer to the truth, closer to reclaiming what had been stolen. One evening, as the fluorescent lights hummed above me, I noticed a printout discarded in the trash. I reached down with careful fingers, pulling it out. My heart clenched as I read the words. Karen wasn't pregnant. The story she had spun to David, the tears, the supposed urgency, everything was a lie. Her real plan was far more manipulative. She was pushing David to sell the house immediately, not for their future child, but to pay off her massive gambling debts. My chest tightened, the betrayal cutting deeper than anything I had imagined. The woman I had welcomed into our home, the woman my son had trusted, was plotting not only to steal our possessions, but to manipulate my son emotionally and financially in a way that left him powerless. I felt anger, yes, but it was tempered by a deep, sorrowful understanding. David wasn't the villain here. He was a victim, ensnared by a woman whose charm masked a ruthless intent. I ran my fingers over Barnaby's soft fur, seeking calm in his steady presence. "We have to be careful, boy," I murmured. "We have to know everything before we act." Suddenly, I heard footsteps. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively ducked into a supply closet, dragging Barnaby with me. He whimpered softly, his body pressed close to mine as we crouched in the shadows. I held my breath, listening to the approaching heels on polished floors, the click and shuffle of papers being moved across a desk. My pulse raced, a combination of fear and adrenaline sharpening my senses. Through the narrow crack of the closet door, I saw her. Karen. She was laughing softly, the sound low and intimate, and I felt a twist in my stomach. The regional manager appeared, his hand brushing against hers, their faces close. And then I saw it, my son's boss, the man who had a professional duty to be honest and loyal, leaning in as Karen kissed him. My chest constricted, my vision blurred with a mixture of fury and disbelief. The two of them were entwined in deception, weaving a lie that threatened to destroy everything David and I had worked for. Barnaby pressed closer to me, as if sensing my need for comfort, and I felt a surge of protective instinct. They had no idea I was here, no inkling that I had seen everything, and that gave me power, the quiet, terrifying power of knowledge. I stayed still, my breath slow and measured, watching their actions unfold. Each second felt like an eternity, but I knew the value of patience. The truth was now mine to wield. I thought of David, imagining him trusting both of these people, believing in their integrity, and my heart ached. It didn't deserve this betrayal. He didn't deserve to be manipulated, deceived, or used as a pawn in Karen's game. I pressed a hand to my lips, trying to suppress a sound, my mind racing with strategy. Every piece of evidence, every observation was another brick in the foundation I would build to protect my son and reclaim my life. The hours passed slowly as I continued my nocturnal espionage, Barnaby ever vigilant at my side. I learned where they hid documents, what they left unattended, what assumptions they made about the loyalty of others. Each discovery was a step closer to understanding the scope of their deception, and each one strengthened my resolve. I was no longer the discarded mother standing in the cold autumn wind. I was an agent of justice in my own life, a quiet force moving unseen, gathering the truth until the time was right. Finally, as dawn approached and the office settled into an eerie quiet, I allowed myself a small moment of satisfaction. I had seen, I had learned, and I had evidence. Karen was not the naive, sweet new bride she pretended to be. She was a manipulator, a schemer, and she had underestimated both me and Barnaby. I patted his head gently, feeling his warm, steady presence, and whispered, "We're ready, boy. One day soon, they'll see just how strong we really are." And in that quiet, fluorescent-lit office, hidden in the shadows with my loyal beagle at my side, I realized something profound. Fear had been replaced by clarity. Anger had been tempered into purpose. Betrayal had become a tool, and I was ready to wield it with precision. The night janitor had become the silent observer, the keeper of truth, the guardian of justice for the mother and son who deserved nothing less. I had known betrayal before. I had felt it in the quiet moments when someone I loved chose another path, when loyalty crumbled under the weight of selfish desire. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for this. As I pressed my body and Barnabas against the hard, cold wall of the supply closet, I watched through the narrow crack and realized the truth in a single, horrifying moment. My son wasn't the villain here. He was a victim. Weak, foolish, easily manipulated, a boy still trying to navigate the adult world with the naive hope that love could be trusted. Karen, with her perfect smile and calculated charm, wasn't just after my assets. She was planning to leave him in the dust, running off with the regional manager, while David was left to bear the consequences of her lies. My chest tightened, my stomach twisted. I could feel Barnaby trembling against me, sensing my tension, and I pulled him closer, burying my face in his fur. The soft, familiar scent of his coat, the mixture of earth and warmth, was grounding. Tears streamed down my face, dripping into his fur as I hugged him tightly. I could feel the anger that had burned so hot in the days before shifting into something more complicated, more sorrowful. My son had broken my heart by standing idle, by letting himself be swept along, but he was still my boy. And now, watching him being destroyed piece by piece, I realized that my fight was no longer about revenge or reclaiming what was mine. It was about saving him. The thought of him, oblivious and manipulated, stirred a storm in my chest. I could see his vulnerability in every decision he had made, in every hesitant glance he cast toward Karen. She had played her hand so well, weaving illusions and half-truths to make him doubt himself, doubt me, doubt everything he once held dear. And I, who had lived a lifetime of careful observation and quiet perseverance, could see through the web. I was furious, yes, but the fury was mixed with a profound sense of responsibility. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting to rescue the boy I had raised from the ruin that threatened to swallow him whole. Barnaby pressed his head against my shoulder as I tried to control my shaking hands. I whispered to him, soft and urgent, "We have to be patient, Barnaby. We have to be smart. We can't let her see us, can't let her know we've seen everything." His tail thumped lightly against the floor, a tiny heartbeat of reassurance, a reminder that I was not alone in this. I drew a deep, shaky breath, forcing my mind to focus. Every step, every decision had to be measured. Through the crack in the door, I watched Karen and the regional manager, their bodies close, their movements intimate. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than anything I had felt before. And yet, in that moment, a strange clarity settled over me. I could not act recklessly. I could not allow my emotions to betray me. This was a chess game, and I needed patience and strategy. Every glance, every whisper I observed was a piece of evidence. A clue that would allow me to protect David and reclaim control of the chaos they had orchestrated. A low growl rumbled from Barnaby's chest, vibrating through my arms as he stiffened, alert to danger. I held my breath, heart hammering, and froze. Karen stopped kissing the man abruptly, her eyes widening as she swiveled toward the sound. "Did you hear that?" she hissed, her voice low and menacing, walking straight toward the closet door. My stomach dropped, and for a heartbeat, I feared we had been discovered. I pressed closer to Barnaby, feeling the warmth of his fur and the reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat, and whispered, "Stay calm, boy. Stay calm." The seconds stretched on, excruciating and endless, until she seemed to dismiss the noise, muttering something under her breath and returning her attention to the man beside her. My body relaxed slightly, but I did not move. The thrill of fear and the rush of protective instinct coursed through me, mingling with sorrow and determination. David had no idea what was happening right under his nose, and that ignorance made him vulnerable in ways that I could not ignore. I thought of the nights I had spent worrying about him, the hours of cooking and mending, the sacrifices I had made so that he could grow up believing the world was fair and that family was loyal. And now, watching him being deceived by someone he trusted, I felt a fierce protectiveness rise inside me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about safeguarding the son I loved, the boy who had been my anchor through decades of struggle. I pressed a hand to Barnaby's head, feeling the softness of his fur under my palm, and whispered again, more firmly this time, "We're going to fix this, Barnaby. We're going to save him. He's not lost, not while we're here." His tail thumped gently against the floor, steady and comforting, and I felt a surge of hope threading through the anger and sorrow. Time moved slowly in that closet. I could hear every creak of the floor, every shuffle of papers, every quiet breath from the office beyond. And as I sat there, holding Barnaby, I realized something profound. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it waits, observes, calculates. Sometimes strength is patience, and the will to protect those who cannot yet protect themselves. Karen and the regional manager continued their scheming, oblivious to the silent observer hiding mere feet away. But I knew now that their confidence was misplaced. I had seen the truth, and the truth was mine to use. David might not see it yet. He might not even believe it. But he was my son, and I would do whatever it took to save him from ruin. As the minutes passed and their shadows moved across the floor beyond the closet, I felt a quiet determination settle over me. My anger had shifted into purpose. My sorrow had been tempered with resolve. I wasn't just fighting to reclaim what was mine. I was fighting to shield my son from a storm of deceit and betrayal that threatened to destroy him. And with Barnaby at my side, loyal, steadfast, and aware in ways only a dog could be, I knew that together we could face whatever came next. This was no longer a battle of possessions. It was a fight for redemption, for love, for family. And I would not lose, not now, not ever. I had learned long ago that timing is everything. In the quiet of the night, under the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant echo of my own footsteps, I created a distraction that would give me the freedom I needed. A mop bucket tipped over with a splash, water pooling across the polished floor like a small, controlled disaster. Barnaby barked sharply, startled at first, then immediately understood the signal. He stayed close, moving with me as I slipped out of the back, unseen, unnoticed. Every step felt electric, a rush of anticipation mingling with the adrenaline of evasion. They didn't see me. They didn't even think to look. For the next 2 days, I moved in a state of quiet preparation. The company's annual Builders Gala was approaching, and the knowledge that David and Karen would be there, basking in their hollow victory, made my resolve sharpen. They were already celebrating his promotion, a promotion built not on merit, but on deceit, manipulation, and stolen assets. The thought made my stomach twist, but it also fueled a fire deep within me. I was no longer the discarded mother or the invisible janitor. I was about to reclaim my presence in a way that would leave no room for doubt, no space for lies. I went to the most expensive boutique in the city, the kind of place where the fabric feels like liquid silk and the diamonds catch the light in a way that makes your chest ache with longing. I told the clerk, with the quiet confidence that only years of knowing yourself can bring, I need a gown that says I own the place. She looked at me, a flicker of doubt in her eyes, and I smiled. I had never asked for attention, never craved admiration, but tonight required something different. Tonight required a statement, a presence, a declaration of power and dignity. The gown I chose was a shimmering silver, falling in soft waves that caught the light with every movement. It wasn't just a dress. It was armor, a signal that I would no longer be invisible, that I would not be underestimated. For Barnaby, my steadfast companion, I selected a diamond-studded collar. He deserved to shine too, to walk beside me not as a pet but as a partner, a guardian, a symbol of the loyalty and courage that had guided us through the darkest days. I looked at him, and he wagged his tail slowly, as if understanding that tonight we would step into a new chapter together. The night of the gala arrived, and I felt a nervous thrill coursing through me. I did not enter through the back door, the way a cleaning lady might. No, that would have been too predictable, too easy to dismiss. I walked the red carpet. My heels clicked against the marble, the sound deliberate and commanding. The security guard stepped forward, frowning as he tried to block my path. "Cleaning lady, you can't be here," he said, voice firm but unsure. I stopped, turning to him with a calm smile that carried the weight of authority and experience. "I'm not the cleaning lady tonight, dear," I said, my voice steady, controlled. At that moment, the CEO of the holding company, someone who had been my employee for years, stepped forward. He bowed deeply, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement. "Mrs. Vance, right this way," he said. The doors swung open, and the hall seemed to pause. Every head turned. Every gaze found me, and I felt the weight of decades of patience, of endurance, of betrayal and resilience settle into that single moment. Karen's expression froze. The perfect mask of confidence cracked just slightly, and I saw the flicker of fear and disbelief in her eyes. My son David didn't recognize me at first, his smile faltering as he realized the woman who had been banished from their lives was now walking among the elite of the company he had once thought he owned. The red carpet shimmered beneath the lights, reflecting not just the brilliance of my gown, but the promise of what was to come. Barnaby trotted beside me, his diamond collar catching the light, and I felt a surge of pride and love. This was more than a gala. This was a declaration. This was the moment when invisibility ended, when silence transformed into authority. The room, filled with executives, managers, and colleagues, fell into a hush. The hum of conversation faded, replaced by the sound of my own measured breathing and the soft, steady steps of my dog beside me. I took in the scene with calm precision, noticing every reaction, every whisper, every sideways glance. The elegance of the room, the sparkling decorations, the clinking of champagne glasses, it all seemed distant, muted by the intensity of the moment. I could feel the anticipation in the air, a tangible tension that I had created simply by stepping into my rightful place. Karen looked ready to protest, to call security, but she hesitated. That tiny pause was everything. It was the crack in the armor of her confidence, the first sign that the game had shifted. I smiled gently, inwardly savoring the power of presence, of dignity reclaimed. David's eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of recognition, of shame, and perhaps a dawning understanding that things were not as simple as he had believed. I could feel Barnaby's steady heartbeat against my leg, the warmth of his body grounding me, reminding me of the loyalty and love that had carried me this far. I whispered softly to him, "We've arrived, boy. We're ready." And in that moment, I realized that the gala was not just a celebration of construction or corporate success. It was a turning point. It was the beginning of reclaiming everything that had been stolen, of righting the wrongs that had been done. As we stepped further into the hall, heads turning, whispers spreading, I understood something profound. The world had tried to discard me. It had underestimated my strength, my resolve, my capacity to endure and overcome. But tonight, dressed in silver and accompanied by the most loyal companion I had ever known, I was no longer invisible. I was seen. I was acknowledged. I was powerful. And the night, which had seemed ordinary and celebratory, had transformed into a stage where justice, dignity, and love would be revealed in their fullest form. This was only the beginning, but for the first time in weeks, perhaps months, I felt the thrill of hope, the quiet joy of anticipation, and the firm, unshakable certainty that I was about to reclaim not just what was mine, but the future I had fought so hard to protect for myself, for Barnaby, and for my son. The lights in the gala hall glimmered like stars, but the sparkle of chandeliers and crystal glasses was no match for the tension I carried in my chest. Every step I took along the red carpet felt like walking on a tightrope strung between fear and triumph. Barnaby trotted beside me, his diamond-studded collar catching the light, a silent emblem of loyalty and courage. I could feel the gazes of every attendee, their curiosity rippling through the air. Conversations faltered, whispers hushed. And there she was, Karen, the architect of so much pain and deceit, standing with a glass of champagne that shook in her delicate hand. Her eyes widened when they met mine, and I saw the tiniest flicker of panic, the first crack in the polished facade she had spent so long cultivating. "Phyllis?" She laughed, a nervous, brittle sound that carried more fear than amusement. She clutched her champagne as if the crystal stem could anchor her to reality. "What are you doing here? You're embarrassing us?" Her words were sharp, but her trembling fingers betrayed her confidence. In one swift motion, she tried to grab my arm to physically remove me from a world she thought I had no right to enter. Barnaby barked, a deep, authoritative sound that sliced through the murmur of the crowd. I felt the vibrations in my chest as I instinctively pulled my arm away from her grasp. My voice was calm but deadly clear. "Don't touch me, Karen. You might get dog on your fake Chanel dress." The words were simple, yet weighted with decades of endurance, of patience, of watching the world underestimate me. Barnaby pressed close, his presence a shield, and I realized that for the first time in weeks, I felt the balance of power firmly in my hands. Karen's face paled, the mask slipping further. She hesitated, unsure how to respond. She had relied on her charm and deception, but neither could shield her from the truth standing tall in a silver gown, accompanied by the dog she had mocked so cruelly. I moved forward, toward the stage, the microphone resting on the podium like a baton waiting for its conductor. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. Each step felt deliberate, a march toward justice, toward reclaiming my dignity, toward the final act of a performance that had been building for weeks. I took the microphone in hand, letting the weight of it anchor me. The room fell into a hushed anticipation, sensing that something momentous was about to unfold. I inhaled deeply, the cool air carrying the scent of perfume and polished wood. "Welcome, everyone," I began, my voice strong, resonant, imbued with the authority I had earned through years of endurance and quiet vigilance. "I am Phyllis Vance. You may know me as the janitor or as David's discarded mother. But legally, I am the new majority shareholder of this corporation." A sudden silence rippled through the crowd, the kind that presses on your chest and makes your heartbeat sound loud in your ears. Conversations stopped mid-word, glasses trembled in hesitant hands, and David, my boy, my son who had been ensnared in the web of deceit, dropped his champagne glass. The crystals shattered on the polished floor, loud as a gunshot, echoing across the room and sending tiny shards sparkling like frozen rain. I could see the shame and disbelief in his eyes, and though my heart ached for him, I knew he needed this awakening. He needed to see the truth, even if it hurt. Karen's face had drained of color. Her carefully cultivated composure was gone, replaced by a raw, naked panic. She opened her mouth to protest, to argue, to assert control, but no words came. She was silent in the presence of authority she had never expected, a force she had never anticipated. I let the silence linger, letting it sink into the bones of the room, letting it settle in every eye and every ear. The truth is a heavy thing, and when it lands unexpectedly, it leaves no room for pretense. I looked around, letting my gaze rest on familiar faces, the employees who had smiled politely at the janitor, the executives who had glanced at me without notice, the crowd that had ignored my presence for so long. They all now saw me clearly. They saw strength, resilience, and the quiet power that comes from never giving up, even when the world tries to discard you. Then I delivered the final blow. "And I have some personnel changes to announce," I said, my voice calm, deliberate, unwavering. I looked directly at the regional manager, whose arrogance had masked complicity for far too long. The room seemed to hold its breath, sensing the reckoning that was about to unfold. Every eye turned to him, the weight of accountability pressing down, undeniable and unavoidable. Karen gasped softly, a high, trembling sound. Her plan had unraveled, her carefully orchestrated scheme laid bare by nothing more than truth, persistence, and a woman who refused to be invisible. I could feel the tension in the room, the electricity of justice and vindication mingling with awe and disbelief. I could feel Barnaby's steady presence at my side, a reminder that loyalty and love had brought us here, that we were not alone in this fight, that even in the face of betrayal, we had prevailed. David's eyes, wide and unblinking, met mine once more. There was fear there, yes, but also relief, a dawning understanding. He had been blinded by affection and misplaced trust, but now he was seeing clearly, and I knew that the moment of confrontation, though painful, was necessary. Pain, after all, is often the catalyst for growth. I took another deep breath, feeling the weight of every step I had taken, every challenge I had endured, every betrayal I had witnessed. This moment was not about revenge. This moment was about justice, clarity, and the reclamation of dignity. And as I stood there, silver gowns shimmering, Barnaby at my side, microphone in hand, I understood that I had not only confronted them, but I had reclaimed myself. The room remained silent, the tension palpable. Every gaze fixed on me, on the quiet force that had been underestimated for too long. And in that silence, I realized something profound. Power is not about domination, nor is it about wealth or status. Power is about truth, courage, and the willingness to act when others are blind to injustice. I had walked through betrayal, through humiliation, and through the quiet pain of being discarded, and I had emerged not broken, but resolute, radiant, and unstoppable. The room was silent now, every eye fixed on me, every whisper paused mid-air. I could feel the weight of the crowd pressing in from all sides, the hum of chandeliers overhead like the pulse of anticipation. Karen's face was a mask of disbelief, panic, and rising fury. She had believed she controlled the narrative, that her web of lies and manipulation had gone unnoticed. But now, as I stepped closer to the podium, I felt the thrill of quiet justice settle deep in my bones. I lifted the remote in my hand, the device feeling impossibly heavy with the gravity of the moment. The big screen behind me flickered, and suddenly, the images of evidence illuminated the hall. Not the company's architectural plans, not the glamorous gala photos, but the documents I had found discarded in the trash, carelessly tossed aside as if their significance was meaningless. The gambling debts, the emails between Karen and the regional manager, all laid bare for everyone to see. My breath caught as I saw the faces in the crowd turn, some with shock, some with recognition, others with awe at the audacity of a woman who had been underestimated for too long. David's face paled as he looked from the screen to Karen, his expression contorted with confusion and dread. I could see the sickness settle over him, not physical, but the gut-wrenching realization that the person he had trusted, The person he had loved had manipulated him with cold calculation. His hands trembled slightly, a subtle but unmistakable sign of the internal chaos she had wrought in him. And Karen, caught in the glare of exposure, faltered, her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. I took a step closer to the microphone, letting my voice resonate clearly, steadily, with the authority of someone who had endured injustice and emerged stronger. "Karen," I said, calm, precise, each word deliberate, "you rushed the wedding to secure the house. But you forgot one crucial detail. The house wasn't in David's name. It was held in a trust. And the trust requires a 5-year vesting period." I paused, letting the words sink in, letting the weight of consequence settle over every shoulder in the room. The shift in the air was palpable, like a tide receding to reveal the rocks beneath. Every eye found Karen's, and I could see her realization hit her like a physical blow. Her breathing quickened, her lips parted, but no words came. She had counted on her deception, on the speed and impulsiveness of greed, to secure her prize. But the rules, the legal safeguards she had ignored, were implacable. She had underestimated me, and that would be her undoing. I looked at the regional manager next, his smugness evaporating in the face of undeniable truth. I could see the fear that danced in his eyes, the same fear that had begun to etch itself across Karen's features. And then, quietly, deliberately, I delivered the final lines that would seal the moment. "You married him for nothing," I said, my tone calm, almost gentle in its precision. "You are broke, and David, you are fired." The words landed like a hammer, striking steel. Karen's composure shattered completely. Her breath came in sharp, erratic bursts. She stumbled forward, eyes wild, and screamed, a sound that was half rage, half desperation. "You old witch!" she shrieked, raising her hand as if to strike me, to somehow reverse the consequences I had unveiled, to rewrite reality with the sheer force of her fury. Barnaby reacted instantly. I saw him launch across the polished floor, a blur of tricolor fur and sinew honed by years of loyalty and instinct. He didn't bite. No, this was not aggression, but protection. He tackled Karen flat to the ground, his paws firm but careful, his growl low and guttural, primal and unyielding. I felt the tension leave my shoulders, the knowledge that my steadfast companion was shielding me, holding the line, giving me the moment I needed to reclaim control. Karen struggled beneath him, but Barnaby's eyes, sharp and unwavering, pinned her in place. She could scream, she could flail, but she could not touch me. The crowd around us murmured, some gasping, some whispering in astonishment at the loyalty and intelligence of the dog who had protected me as fiercely as any human could. I felt a swell of pride for Barnaby, for his instincts, for the unspoken bond that had carried us through weeks of uncertainty, fear, and betrayal. I stepped forward, calm and composed, my silver gown catching the light of the chandeliers, my heels clicking lightly against the floor. Each step was deliberate, measured, a symbol of the control and dignity I had reclaimed. I knelt briefly to stroke Barnaby's head, murmuring softly, "Good boy, Barnaby. That's my brave boy." His tail wagged slowly, a ripple of reassurance that steadied my heart and reminded me that even in the most chaotic of storms, loyalty and love endure. Karen lay on the floor, her breath ragged, her confidence shattered, and I could see in her eyes the flicker of disbelief, the dawning understanding that she had miscalculated entirely. She had underestimated me, underestimated the depth of my resilience, the breadth of my intelligence, and the steadfastness of the bond between a woman and her dog. I straightened slowly, letting the room take in the full measure of the moment. The crowd, which had been silent in shock, began to murmur softly, some nodding, some whispering, all acknowledging the undeniable truth. Justice had been served, dignity restored, and deceit exposed. David stood frozen, processing everything, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. The first signs of understanding and, perhaps, regret. And as I looked at him, my son, my boy, I knew that this moment, though harsh and dramatic, was necessary. He needed to see reality, to understand the consequences of misplaced trust, to learn that even in a world filled with betrayal, integrity and courage prevail. I took a deep breath, feeling the surge of relief, pride, and triumph mingling with a quiet, tender love. Barnaby stood at my side, unwavering, protective, and loyal as ever. Together we had faced deceit, danger, and humiliation, and together we had emerged victorious. The gala, once a place of false celebration, had become the stage for justice, for clarity, and for the affirmation that honesty, courage, and love, both human and canine, cannot be denied. In that moment, I understood something profound. Life may try to discard us, betray us, even humiliate us, but it also provides moments of reclamation, moments of triumph, and moments of grace. And with Barnaby at my side, I was ready to embrace every one of them. The echoes of the gala still lingered in my ears, a reverberating chorus of glass, whispers, and the quiet gasp of revelation. I watched from the periphery as uniformed officers gently but firmly guided Karen through the grand doors, her struggles futile against the weight of law and consequence. She screamed, cried, and pleaded in a desperate torrent, but the room had shifted irreversibly. Justice had arrived, and it was deliberate, measured, and inescapable. The regional manager, who had once towered over others with his air of arrogance, was escorted to the exit by a pair of equally solemn HR representatives. He offered no protest. The magnitude of his miscalculations was now undeniable. I let the officers take them both away, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion seep into my bones. The confrontation had drained me, not just physically, but emotionally. The tension, the fear, the uncertainty, all had left indelible marks. And yet, I felt a strange calm in the center of it all, a sense that the scales had finally balanced, that the harm inflicted had been acknowledged and addressed. Stepping out into the crisp evening air, the autumn wind tugged at my silver gown, and I wrapped myself around Barnaby instinctively. His fur, warm against my hand, grounded me. He had been my steadfast companion through weeks of chaos, deceit, and danger, and I owed him more than words could express. Together, we walked to the curb outside the hotel, the world quieter now, as though holding its breath for what would come next. There, slumped on the edge of the curb, was David. His shoulders shook slightly, and I could hear the faint hitch of sobs escaping through his fingers as he buried his face in his hands. I approached slowly, not wanting to startle him, not wanting to intrude on the raw vulnerability he displayed. Barnaby trotted beside me, his presence reassuring, protective, as if sensing the fragility of the moment and the delicate balance of trust between us. "Mom," David whispered, voice breaking, eyes barely lifting from his hands. "I'm so sorry. She manipulated everything." His words were heavy with guilt, with the painful realization that his judgment had been clouded, that his loyalty had been misplaced. His fingers trembled slightly as he spoke, the weight of betrayal pressing upon him with the force of a physical blow. I knelt slowly beside him, letting Barnaby rest his head against my lap. I placed a hand on David's shoulder, feeling the warmth beneath my fingertips, the steady beat of his heart, and the tremor of emotion that mirrored my own. "She did," I said, my voice firm, yet carrying the sadness of a mother who had watched her child stumble into pain. "She did manipulate you, David, but you let her. You chose a pretty face over the woman who wiped your nose, who worked 2 jobs to put food on the table, who sacrificed her own comfort to see you succeed in life." My eyes softened as I looked at him, the grief in my heart tempered by the deep, unbreakable bond between us. "You weren't just deceived by her lies. You abandoned the truth you already had, the love and guidance you once trusted. And now you have to face the consequences. David's hands fell from his face, tears streaking down his cheeks, and he met my gaze with a mixture of shame, remorse, and longing. The weight of adulthood was settling on his shoulders for the first time, and though painful, it was necessary. He was no longer a boy living in illusions. He was a man confronting reality, and I, as his mother, had to let him navigate that path without cushioning every fall. "Can I come home?" he asked softly, a quivering voice that revealed his inner struggle. A child lost in the shadow of his mistakes, yearning for the comfort of familiarity, for the sanctuary of unconditional acceptance. I looked down at Barnaby, who lifted his head, eyes meeting mine. His tail wagged slowly, a subtle, deliberate affirmation, as if he understood the gravity of the decision before me. I drew in a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs and steady the tumult of emotion within me. I had to make the right choice, not the easy one. "No, David," I said, voice gentle but unwavering. "The house is being sold. It belongs to me, yes, but it cannot be the place where mistakes are repeated, where reliance overshadows growth. I'm buying a ranch." I paused, letting the words settle. "A ranch where Barnaby and I will create a home filled with purpose, where we can help those who have been discarded, abandoned, or overlooked." I saw the question flicker in David's eyes, the confusion and longing for the safety net of home, but I continued, feeling the truth resonate within me. "You need to stand on your own 2 feet for the first time in your life. You need to learn responsibility, accountability, and the strength that comes from forging your own path. I won't hold your hand through every misstep anymore, David. That's not my role. That's your journey." He nodded slowly, swallowing hard, tears glistening like tiny diamonds on his cheeks. There was fear there, yes, but also a glimmer of understanding, of acceptance, and perhaps the first hint of pride in recognizing the responsibility of adulthood. He reached out a tentative hand, and I let him touch mine, not as a mother coddling a child, but as a mentor, a guide, a force of unwavering love that respected the necessity of growth through challenge. Barnaby nudged him gently, pressing against David's leg, and for the first time that evening a small, hopeful smile broke across his face. I understand," he murmured. "I'll try, Mom. I promise I'll try." I smiled, a quiet, tender smile, one born from relief, pride, and the knowledge that the harsh lessons of the night would not break him. They would shape him. "That's all I ask," I said softly, brushing his hair from his forehead. Barnaby's tail wagged in agreement, and I felt a sense of completion, of a chapter ending not with despair, but with the possibility of redemption and growth. The cool night wrapped around us, and I felt the subtle shift in the air, the quiet assurance that life, though harsh, could still be navigated with grace, courage, and love. For tonight, justice had been served, and the bond between a mother, her son, and her loyal companion had been tested and strengthened. And in that moment, I knew, no matter the challenges ahead, Barnaby, David and I would face them together, not as victims of circumstance, but as survivors of betrayal, resilient, wiser, and ready to embrace the promise of a new beginning. 6 months had passed since that night at the gala, and the air here on the Montana ranch carried a crispness that made my lungs sing with freedom. I stood on the wide wooden porch, leaning against the railing, watching the sun sink low behind the distant hills. The sky was painted with strokes of orange, lavender, and gold, each color reflecting the quiet triumph that had settled over my life. Barnaby, full of energy and joy, darted through the tall grass, chasing butterflies with a kind of blissful abandon that made my heart swell. His ears flopped as he twisted and leapt, and every time he caught one, if only in spirit, he barked triumphantly, shaking the air with delight. I laughed softly, the sound spilling from me like sunlight. This ranch wasn't just land and fences. It was a reclamation of life. Each tree, each stretch of grass, every barn and fence post had been chosen with intention, a place to heal, to rebuild, and to create something lasting. I had turned it into a sanctuary for elderly dogs, dogs abandoned, forgotten, or cast aside by humans who no longer had room for them. And in doing so, I found purpose in a way I hadn't known was possible. These creatures, so often overlooked, mirrored the path I had walked. Like me, they had been discarded, underestimated, treated as less than they were. Now, here, they had a home, a place to feel safe, cherished, and loved. Sarah, the young waitress who had once slipped Barnaby's extra bacon at the diner, now moved among the kennels and fields with a quiet competence that made my heart swell with pride. She had become my manager, my right hand, and my friend. Watching her interact with the dog, seeing the compassion in her eyes, reminded me of the ripple effect of kindness, the way a single act could reshape a life. I had once given her a small anonymous tip, a token of hope and support, and now, here she was, helping me give hope to dozens of others. Life had a way of returning goodness in ways we never expected. The soft rumble of an engine broke the quiet, and I turned to see a beat-up old car pulling up the gravel driveway. My heart skipped a beat as the driver's side door opened, and there he was, David. He looked different, older somehow, his face marked by honest work rather than schemes or illusions. Dirt smudged his jeans and the sleeves of his worn flannel, and yet there was a quiet strength in his stance, a humility I had never seen before. In his hand, he carried a small bag of high-quality dog treats, not flashy or unnecessary, but thoughtful, a reflection of his newfound responsibility. "Hey, Mom," he said softly, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He didn't ask for money, for forgiveness, for handouts. He simply wanted to be present. I felt a warmth bloom in my chest, a tender relief that even after all that had happened, he still sought connection, not entitlement, not escape, but the simple, human desire to be part of something real. I waved him over, and he climbed the porch steps slowly, each one deliberate, like he was learning to walk in the weight of his own accountability. Barnaby bounded forward to greet him, tail wagging furiously, and David laughed, a sound roughened by labor yet unrestrained, full of genuine happiness. He dropped to sit beside me, placing the bag of treats on the railing as though it were a peace offering, a token of a bridge rebuilt. We watched the sunset together in silence at first, the kind of silence that feels full rather than empty, the kind that carries with it reflection, understanding, and healing. The golden light poured over the hills and the paddocks, bathing Barnaby as he rolled in the grass, carefree and exuberant. I reached out and brushed David's shoulder, feeling the steady, honest rhythm of his heartbeat. And in that moment, all the past grief, betrayal, and hardship seemed to fold into something softer, more profound. "You've really done something here," David said quietly, voice low as the sun sank further. "Not just the ranch. All of this. It's amazing." His eyes lingered on the dogs, on Barnaby, and then on me. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I want to do better. I want to be better." I smiled, my gaze drifting over the fields, the sanctuary, and finally resting on my son. "David, you've already begun," I said gently. "Standing here, acknowledging what went wrong, and being willing to start again, that's the first step. That's more than a lot of people ever manage in a lifetime." I paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. And remember, it's not just about work or success or even making amends. It's about integrity, kindness, and love, the kind that can't be bought or borrowed. That's what makes a life worth living. Barnaby nudged me gently with his nose, and I scratched behind his ears, feeling the soft fur beneath my fingers and the steady warmth of his body. He looked up at me, eyes shining with intelligence and trust, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the creature who had carried me through the darkest nights, who had reminded me every day that loyalty and courage could conquer despair. He was not just my dog, He was my partner, my anchor, my family. The sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep indigo, dotted with early stars. David leaned back against me, the bag of treats forgotten on the railing, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in decades. Life had tried to retire me, to discard me, to render me invisible and powerless. Instead, it had given me a promotion, one of purpose, fulfillment, and undeniable love. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a force of nature, a guardian of those who had been overlooked, a woman who had faced betrayal and emerged triumphant. And Barnaby? He was the undisputed king of the ranch, beloved by all, fierce and loyal, the embodiment of all the lessons we had learned together. As the stars began to twinkle overhead and the gentle sounds of the ranch settled around us, the rustle of leaves, the soft breathing of the dogs, the distant call of a night bird, I realized that endings are not truly endings. They are beginnings, and this was only the start of something extraordinary. If you've enjoyed this story and want to see more Tollies of courage, loyalty, and life-changing bonds, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Every story here is crafted to inspire, to touch the heart, and to remind us that even in the darkest moments, hope, resilience, and love can always guide the way.